Are communication breakdowns and collaboration gaps causing your projects both time and resources? If this is something that you are dealing with, then this video is for you. In this video, we're going to provide you with 3 areas in which your team can improve both collaboration and communication, both in your projects and also within your business. I'm your host, Darius Gordon, and I'm here to help you become a PM Pro. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know that we will continue to provide tips, tricks, and education around all things project management. So if you like the content, please like the video. Please also subscribe to the channel if you would like to learn more. And if you find this video helpful and you know that this might be able to help someone else, please share it with someone as well. And just comment down below any of your thoughts or any additions that you may have. With that said, let's get started and jump right into how we can improve both communication and team collaboration. So how do you spot poor communication and lack of communication within your project and organization? First, let's start off with 1. It is evident that there is a lack of knowledge sharing within your team or in your organization. Your team members aren't quite sure who's doing what, who's working on what, where communication should be communicated effectively, and what information should be communicated effectively. Your team isn't talking to one another and sharing information, so Sally or Tom doesn't know who's doing what and maybe might be working on the same things together, or might be doing one different task, but then there's a task that's falling short because no one knows who's working on what at what particular time. Another thing is that the team isn't working together. So the team isn't working together to ensure that the project is moving forward, that there are not gaps within the project, and that also we're tackling any unforeseen risks that may have come up within the project itself. Another sign that you can actually see is that stakeholders are not aware of the project's objectives and they're not aware of the project goals. They're not aware of what's supposed to happen on the project in terms of timeline, and then they're also just not aware of how their participation lends to supporting the project to the finish line. The last thing, like I mentioned before, is tasks being dropped. You'll see that a lot of tasks might not actually have somebody who's doing it, or it may not have anybody on it, or just being left to itself. And that can cause delays on your project and actually slow things down. Some of the impacts are your project outcomes, right? There might be missed deadlines where your team is just missing the deadline because no one knew that it was there, no one knew who was working on it. Your team might also miss dependencies, so they might actually miss that this particular task needs another task to actually finish before it can actually get started, which can then affect how your team moves forward towards that deadline. And then there's rework, where your team has to constantly do work over and constantly have to review or redo something that was already reviewed because communication was just lacking. Another impact is delays on the project, like we mentioned. That's both delays in approvals, delays in timeline, delays on the schedule, delays on receiving resources, delays on hard printing dates, or any vendor communications or collaborations. You'll find delays within your project as an impact to how poor communication and collaboration. Another thing that you'll find is that your costs, especially if you're billable, will increase. So as team members are spending a lot of time reworking and doing work over, and the project management team is constantly having to reach out to the client or vendors to ensure that we're moving forward, it starts to eat up that time, which can then increase the amount of time and cost that it takes to complete the project. And honestly, this can impact your team's morale. This can affect your team's morale drastically because they're not meeting with each other, they're not communicating with each other, they're not working together, and therefore they're just working on an island. And they may not want to work on an island, but also they may run into issues, or they might run into a roadblock that they can't figure out on their own. But because they feel like they're on their own, they're doing their best to tackle it by themselves, which then decreases morale. If the project starts to take a lot longer than what it was supposed to, this can also decrease morale. I do want to mention, in this survey, there was actually shown that there was about 8 hours of productive work time that was wasted due to lack of communication and poor collaboration. Addressing this can help your teams drastically improve not only their time per day and per week, but also the project outcome. Now that we got that out of the way, Here are 3 areas that poor communication and lack of collaboration can, one, show its way into your projects and business, and how to address it. Let's start with area 1, which is internal communication. One of the challenges that you might find in internal communication is actually through time and how your team manages time internally. Your team may face some difficulties or barriers within time due to just, one, workload and overworking, and that can come in quite easily when your team is not communicating and collaborating. Why? Because your team can be spending a lot of time reworking work, but they may also have other projects, and that can spiral out into them spending too much time on a project, and then that can affect the projects that they're working on as well. Another thing that can affect them with time is trying to figure out who they're supposed to reach out to for what. So if they have to reach out to the project manager to review something, or do they need their creative director to review something before it gets to the project manager? Not having that team collaboration can definitely affect how much time a team member needs to actually spend on figuring some things out that they can possibly just have already moving once the team is collaborating a lot better. Another thing that affects it is spending too much time in meetings. Now, I'm a big advocate for meetings, but sometimes some meetings just aren't needed. So we need to be able to, one, effectively communicate how we're going to work together, and then be able to work together in a way that meetings become beneficial and efficient. Another thing that can play into the challenges when it comes to internal team communication is geographic location and working remotely. There are some teams that actually need to work in different time zones within different countries or different geological locations. And that can drastically affect how the team collaborates and communicate, especially if there's no systems involved. Some of these barriers can include language barriers, for example, or can include time zone barriers where it might be 7 o'clock somewhere, but it might be 5 o'clock another place. So just having those difference in time zones can drastically affect when a team can speak to another team member, and then how do they now work through that process. And that's something that the project manager or the lead needs to figure out when working with teams that are in different geographic locations. A lot of different locations and areas and countries have different cultures that will also drastically affect how teams come and work together. So keeping these things in mind, these are some of the challenges that show up when it comes to communication in internal teams. Another one that you'll find is utilizing a single channel for communication. If you're just using emails to communicate with your team, that is not an effective way of properly communicating and collaborating with your team effectively. One particular form of communication tool is going to drastically hinder how quickly your team can actually communicate and collaborate. You want to incorporate as much as you can without over-incorporating. And we're going to get a lot of that information moving forward into some of our solutions for here. So now that we understand some of the challenges that we are facing when it comes to internal team communication, let's move over into some of the solutions that we can actually implement to improve how we collaborate and communicate with our internal team. One of the ways that I like to do that with my internal teams is having regular check-in. I am a big component of having regular meetings and having effective meetings. Meetings are very effective when you know exactly what those meetings are going to be held for, you know who's going to be a part of those meetings, and you know how you're going to actually address those meetings. But having regular occurring meetings is very important in bringing together the team and ensuring that the team is collaborating and communicating effectively. Your meetings should be regular, short, and sweet. And what I mean by that is that you should have a consistent cadence for your meetings. So whether it's weekly, whether it's daily, or whether it's every other day, you should identify what that looks like for you and your project team and ensure that you're having those meetings regularly. You should have them short, meaning that they are at the exact amount of time you're going to need to cover the topics at hand, whether that's 15 minutes, whether that's 30 minutes. You as the lead need to figure out what's the best and shortest time frame you can actually do this in. And then sweet, meaning that you have an actual goal, you have an actual agenda as to what those meetings should be flowing as and what should be the outcome of those meetings when you're having. Simple agendas like reviewing the project's objectives and goals, answering team questions, and addressing any unforeseen issues are great agenda items for your team check-ins, and those should honestly be discussed as often as you possibly can. Not having those questions and not having that space in those meetings to have these conversations will drastically limit how your team comes together, collaborate, and then brainstorm through problems. And you may not know what those problems are until you actually open the floor to have those conversations. So that's why those are the 3 agenda items that I will include when having a 15-minute regular check-in with the team. I'll also go over where we are at the project. Just making sure that everyone is aware that we're at this stage of the project, this is how we're moving forward, and this is how we're going to get this particular section done. Another thing that you want to ensure is happening is that the right people are in the meetings that you have. Whether it is a regular check-in or whether it's a meeting with the client, ensure that the right people are in those meetings. Another solution that I would advise for internal teams is having an instant messenger. Like I said earlier, meetings and emails are great, but they should not be the only way that you communicate with your team. If your team has a quick question or a teammate has a quick question that they can be answered by someone else on the team or even yourself, it is beneficial for them to have an instant messenger where they can quickly shoot a chat over to that individual person and say, hey, I need an answer for this, can you help me? And that person can now take the time and answer it without having to say, hey, let's schedule a call, or let me put a call in your calendar for a simple question that can be answered relatively quickly. The other thing is just discussing what should actually go in emails. We talked about meetings, we talked about instant messenger. What are some of the items that need to go in the emails, and how are the teams using emails effectively? I like to use emails to capture big, long information where team members can spend time when they're cleaning out their inbox and go through it and say, okay, I knew that this conversation had this, but if I need something quick, relatively quickly, I would definitely just use an instant messenger. And when I say instant messenger, it's messaging apps like Slack, Teams, or even GChat. The last way that you can actually help improve your team's internal communication is through the project management tool. Identify what project management tool you're actually going to be using, whether it's Asana, Trello, ClickUp, Workmajig. Any one of those tools are great depending on what your structure is for your team. Please consult with somebody or speak to me directly and we can have a conversation as to what would work best for your organization. But identify what that tool is and then how you're going to actually communicate within that tool. You may want to communicate project milestones within that tool. Like, we got approval from the client for this and now we can move forward. You might want to do that in the tool because the team can actually all see that together and it directly correlates with the project and what's going on with the schedule and what's going on with the budget, etc. So having those communications within that tool allows you to keep all of that project information condensed and together. So identifying what tool you're going to use and how you're going to communicate with your team can also help and improve communication and also collaboration. So now that we mastered the internal communications and how we're going to make improvements with our teams, let's focus now on external communications, which is in our area number 2. So when I say external communication, I'm actually referring to communication with stakeholders and also vendors. A lot of the times we're going to be communicating with stakeholders a lot more because they have a lot of stake in the project or in the activity that we're doing. Our vendors are going to move forward and we're going to have communications with them, but they are going to be kind of moving on within their own space, but you still need to have regular check-ins with them. Not having check-ins with the vendor might lead you to missing dependencies that you didn't even realize were there because you didn't communicate to your vendor and say, hey, we need this by this, can you make this date? And the vendor's like, hey, you know what, before I can deliver this to you, I actually need this from you. And you never talked to them, so you never found out that they needed something from you, and therefore it stalled the project a little bit. So make sure when you have a vendor on the team, make sure you're working and collaborating with them and communicating with them effectively to ensure that they're moving forward. But in this particular area, I am referring to external stakeholders, right? So let's start by tackling some of the challenges that you might face when communicating with your external team. Some of the challenges you might actually face is not being able to schedule time with the client. Let's face it, a lot of the clients that we're working with are higher up in the C-suite and really just don't have the time to always meet with us. They may not have the time to communicate through email and also may not be able to answer phone calls. And you might see that pop up when there's no plan to communicate with your stakeholders, and therefore that communication and collaboration slowly falls off and they fall into the abyss. Another thing that you might see as a challenge is not having the right person to QA the work at the right time. So whether it's a website or whether it is marketing materials, you want to make sure that you know exactly or who of your stakeholders need to review X, Y, and Z. So whatever you're producing at whichever milestone or whatever deliverable you might be providing to them, make sure that they are there. And a lot of times when there's a lack of communication and collaboration with your external team, we don't know who that is. We can't get proper feedback, and therefore it leads to delays in schedules and budgets to go over due to trying to figure out how to best manage that. Another challenge that might be faced when it comes to poor communication and collaboration is stakeholders do not understand the project goals or objectives, timelines, and also the scope. The client doesn't understand these items and these things. It can also drastically affect how you move forward and how you collaborate with the client, as if they don't understand how y'all are moving forward, what needs to happen, what is the scope of the project, what is the objectives, how does it make them better, what is the strategic goal for this, then they may not be as invested. And you may need them at key points such as QA moments, or you may need them to provide feedback or information that can help move you along in certain processes. But without them understanding what the project is and what is entailed for them within the project, you're going to end up having it where when the client just doesn't participate. And that leads into the other part of this, which is their commitment to the project. You'll often see that the client just isn't committed to the project and just isn't aware or cares that the project is happening. But these are some of the challenges that you'll see when it comes to communicating and collaborating with your external stakeholders. Now that we understand some of the challenges that you might face when it comes to communicating with your external teams, let's talk about some of the solutions to those challenges. First and foremost, what I would say is make sure you are scheduling regular check-ins with your stakeholders. So whether that is a bi-weekly meeting or weekly meeting, I wouldn't suggest daily meetings. I would kind of lean towards bi-weekly or weekly, but if there's a need for twice a week, just because there's so much things moving and you need their feedback, then that might be a way that you might move forward also. But the general rule is maybe like a weekly cadence or a bi-weekly cadence. You want to have this time scheduled, and like I said earlier, keep it regular, short, and sweet. Why you want to have these is because these are the opportunities when you can actually make sure that your stakeholders are understanding the strategy of the project, the objectives of the project, milestones, budget, scope, and the timeline. They'll be very much involved in what's going on in the project, which will help them have more buy-in. And then when you need to have those difficult conversations around change orders and contingency, they have been already aware of what's going on, so it doesn't come as a shock or a blindside. If a client doesn't understand a certain process, for like an example is, the client needs to review an acceptance test and you want them to work out of a rail, but they're just not aware of how to best utilize the rail and what information needs to go in there and what needs to be priority, then you can have these conversations with them and ensure them that this is how we're going to work in this particular stage and this is the support we need from you. Another way that you can actually solve and improve external communication with your stakeholders is through that first initial meeting. I know we meet with the client and we might have that first, maybe not a kickoff, but a soft kickoff, or they might just be getting on board and they're signing the proposal. Whatever stage that they're in, you as a project lead, once you have that meeting with the client, you want to ensure that you're having certain conversations and setting the parameter for the way you are going to work with the client. So what that means is that, hey, Mr. Client, I'm going to need to set up a regular check-in with you so that we can continue to move projects along. Hey, I want to just let you know that when we are asking for approval, we have it booked in the schedule for a 2 to 3 day turnaround where we provide you what we need you to review, and then you review it within that time frame and then get back to us so we're not delaying the project. You want to also talk to them about what the change order process is and also the contingency notice. You want to just let them know exactly what the strategic objectives of the project is, the goals, what's in scope, what is not in scope, what the full budget is, and also how y'all are going to work together moving forward to the success of this project. Use this initial meeting to have these conversations so that your clients are aware that this is what it takes to work together to get the project to finish line. If they're aware of this at the beginning, you can use the momentum from that throughout the rest of the regular check-ins to keep them updated, to keep them informed, and to keep their buy-in. The best part about having these initial meetings and having them be a way of how we work together is that you ultimately set the standard for how you are working with the client, and you make sure that the client and you both have the same expectations of how y'all are going to collaborate together to ensure that the project moves forward. So now that we discussed both internal and external communication and collaboration, let's move over into our last area number 3, which is what tools and softwares you're going to be using to foster team communication and collaboration. So let's face it, there are some challenges that you might actually run into when identifying and dealing with your team's communication through software and also external communication. One of the biggest challenges is whether or not you actually pick the right tool. Did you pick the right tool that's going to work for your team, both internally and externally? Does that tool work alongside other tools that you already have in place effectively? And then another thing is that you might have a learning curve with your team that needs to practice using those tools and ensure that they can actually use the tools. You'll find that your team members might say, hey, I don't know how to use this, or they're simply just not using it because they don't want to use it. It's not working well for them. It's not as easy as you may have thought, that communication tool. Another reason that your team members might not be using the tools that you have available is simply because there's just too much tools. You might have such an abundance of tools that no one knows exactly which tool to use for what. These are some challenges that you're going to face and signs that you're going to see when communication and collaboration starts to dwindle because you don't have the right tools in place. Now that we understand some of the challenges that we might face, let's talk about some of the solutions. The first one is ensuring that you actually pick the right tool. I would suggest using email, an instant messenger of some sort like Slack, GChat, or even Teams. And of course, make sure that it pairs with the email service that you're using. So if you're using Gmail or if you're using Outlook, then Outlook might be a little bit better with Microsoft Teams, or Slack and GChat might also work better with Gmail. So just making sure that those communication platforms are aligned in some way, shape, or form. And then also, when it comes to your project management tool, I would suggest finding a tool that works best for how you want to communicate within your project itself. Ensuring that the tools work together is very key because you don't want to get a tool, implement it, and then it doesn't work well with the other things that you're using. I like to use G Suite as a whole, so if you're using G Suite already, Google Drive, GChat, all of those functions and things, chances are you might want to just use Gmail, you might just want to continue along the path. The next solution is creating a comms plan. So once you identify how and what platforms you're going to be using to communicate, create a comms plan. And what that means is how your team should communicate on those particular platforms. Should emails be sent for this? What should instant messages be sent as? What and how should you set up those instant messengers? And what should be included in the project management tool? Let's start off with emails. I view emails as an external to-do list. Most of the time what you're going to find in an email is what people are needing you to do or move forward on. If you respond to them, the more responses you make, the more to-dos you're going to have from your to-do list that's external. So what I would suggest is using emails for external communication when you want to inform folks on a lot of information, or you want to have conversations with your client that you need to get responses and approval back by, and I would definitely use emails. But if it's something quicker like a phone call or a meeting or something that you can kind of implement really quickly, that you might need that quick and instantaneous conversation, then I would suggest using like an instant messenger in that case. Having a comms plan around how you use emails is very important so that team members know, okay, this information goes into this particular platform. Another thing is that the instant messengers that we use, we also need to include that in the comms plan. How are we going to actually have conversations within that instant messenger, right? So Slack, GChat, and Meetings, and Microsoft Teams all have ways of grouping conversations together. Microsoft Teams has the group chats that you might have in there. GChat also has the group spaces, and then Slack, you can also create groups within that platform. I suggest identifying exactly how you want to have that structured. It's easy to reach out to one person and say, hey, Tom, I need this on this. And then now you have Tom and Jane on the same project and not add them into a conversation and go, hey, Tom and Jane, I need this, so hey, where are we at with this? And then finally, you now have Tom, Jane, and Jerry, and you reach out to Jerry. And now Jerry has his own communication. Do you see where I'm going? You need to make sure that your team is having a proper way of having those communications. Create groups and figure out what those groups should be so that your team is communicating effectively. Your team needs to speak to a project, and then they have the group with all of the project members in it. And then also making sure how they communicate within that tool and within that group space to ensure that people aren't just overlooking it because they might think it's to everyone. Or they may not think it's aligned to them, so they just say, okay, I'm gonna leave it alone. Whether your team is either remote or they are working together in office, I would highly suggest incorporating these tools, because even if they're in office working together and you are sending out information, it's a lot better than having somebody walk up to them every 5 minutes and disrupting their flow. It takes people an average of 15 minutes to get back into the groove once interrupted. So just keeping that in mind as you move projects forward and how you develop your communication plan. So with that said, we have discussed the 3 areas that you can actually focus on improving when it comes to your team's collaboration and communication. We've actually discussed signs that you'll see when it comes to poor communication and collaboration within your team, the impact of those signs within your team and your projects, and then we also provided you with 3 areas that you can improve your communication and collaboration with your team. And that is both internally, externally, and also what softwares and tools you're using to help support communication and collaboration on your team. With this information, I'd encourage you to discuss with your team and identify in your projects exactly what areas you can improve upon to ensure that your team is communicating and collaborating effectively together. The tips that I provided you today will definitely help you figure out exactly where you need to go and give you a blueprint as to how to start improving communication and collaboration. So I implore you to take these tips with you, take it back to your organizations, and just have those conversations and ensure that everyone is on the same page and implement some of these skills. This way your team can communicate and collaborate effectively. In the comment section below, if you've already seen some of these issues within your organization and already addressed them, please feel free to drop a comment just speaking to what techniques you use to address poor communication and lack of collaboration within your project teams or business. This information that you share here will be very helpful for others. If you're a business owner looking to improve how your team communicates and collaborates together effectively, and you want to schedule a 30-minute call with me, I do free consultations, and we can definitely meet and have a conversation around some of the problems that you're facing. Please take a look at the description. I'll provide a link where you can actually reach out to me and we can get that conversation moving forward. With that said, I hope you like the content. Please, like I said, like and share with your team. If you are looking for more information around project management, please feel free to subscribe, as I will continue to do videos like this every week. I'm excited to see everyone get out there, be project management pros, and continue to address poor communication and collaboration within their projects. And with that said, I hope you have a fantastic day and keep making your projects better.